totally used by the Israelis in Gaza, by the U.S. in the Balkans, and again, Iraq and Afghanistan.
And by the way, the prevailing winds out of Gaza blow right into Israel, and the winds also blow from the north for part of the year, right out of Lebanon. And, I mean, it's just, it's the equivalent of a gun that you fire at your enemy, but it fires a soft kill weapon back at you because, as you know, sir, the rounds ignite as they leave the barrel and are shedding massive amounts of this uranium.
That's absolutely correct. See, one of the things that the people would like everybody to believe is this stuff doesn't do anything until it hits the target, and that's pure nonsense. It's shedding immediately, and that's what we've proven to watch the videos and photographs. You can go back and pull up the stuff that we did for CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. You can pull up the stuff on 60 Minutes, on Dateline, Nightline, the BBC, the Canadian Broadcasting. You can see it all there. You can pull up the videos and actually look at it yourself and find out how it works. You know, so what we do know, the very earliest work that I know of, and the work that I used for when I was director of the Depleted Uranium Project for the U.S. Army, I used all the research reports when the United States gave Israel uranium munitions to use against the Egyptians during the Arab-Israeli War in 1973. And so our 1974 report, which confirmed all the health and environmental effects, was written as a consequence of giving Israel the use of uranium munitions to use in that Arab-Israeli War in 1973. Medical reports I've got for the UN troops and the other people that were on site totally confirmed. The medical problems are all there. The environmental problems, the on-site contamination that exists to this day out there in the Sinai is all confirmed. So that's where we had the earliest stuff. And then, again, we had an inventory, but we didn't really start to use it until Operate Desert Storm in 1990 and 1991. So when we set up Desert Storm in early spring of 1990 to get the U.S. military in there to control the oil, we did all our bait and switching to get Saddam to give him the approval to go into Kuwait after Kuwait was stealing Iraq's
Doc,
oil.
stay there. Long segment coming up. We're going to have you finish up on the basics of DU. Then we're going to phone calls from victims of DU, and so they can talk to you on air, and we can flesh this out even more. We'll be right back on the other side. The toll-free number to join us, 800-259-9231. Stay with us. I don't think we can get a better informed expert on this, though. He sent me these big stacks I want to go through before we go to your calls here in a moment. Department of Army Technical Bulletin TB 9-1300-278, suppressed copy dated 28 September 1990. So we'll talk about how these went public, and we'll get into all of this. But before we go any further, there's other secret atmospheric testing and weather manipulation that's now been partially declassified, and it deals with chemtrails, not condensation trails, but planes engaging in weather modification with the barium salts and aluminum dioxide, also very toxic, nothing compared to DU, but overall very bad in the aggregate as it bioaccumulates. And the video is going to be shipping out October 22nd. You can get it discounted with my other films as well if you'd like at Infowars.com. And it is your purchase of the books, the T-shirts, everything that makes it all possible. Also, all orders get a free citizen rule book with the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, Founding Father quotes, jury nullification. It is a key info weapon that comes free with all orders. Infowars.com or 888-253-3139 to call an order, 888-253-3139. And you can also write to us at P.O. Box 19549, Austin, Texas, 78760. If you want to be the first to get What in the World Are They Spraying? Okay, Dr. Rokke, you got cut off getting into the Gulf War, and we'll get into these documents, and then straight to the phone calls, the toll-free number to join us. We're going to get to Danny, Dante, Noah, and others, 1-800-259-9231 for folks that have been affected themselves or their family members by DU, veterans that were in Fallujah having problems or anywhere else in Iraq, folks from Iraq or people who have family there that have seen 14 times increases in cancers and birth defects. 1-800-259-9231. Dr. Doug Rokke, please continue.
Well, what we have then is uranium munitions of all types. We have the bunker busters and all this stuff. When these things are used, they create an extremely fine uranium dust, which is radiologically and chemically toxic. And now that creates air, water, soil, and food contamination. The Army's own documents state very clearly after this is used, it causes food and water contamination, makes food and water unusable for eternity. So we have all of that. So now what we're having is cross-contamination by ingestion. That's through eating and drinking. We have inhalation through breathing. We have absorption through the skin, and it goes right through the skin, just moves right in. And then obviously we have wound contamination through open wounds, so the dust gets in there, and the shrapnel. So we have all of this stuff. So we have all the direct medical effects. Now, the U.S. Army orders, direct orders, require immediate radiobioassays. Now, the Somalia order, which is from October of 1993, Colonel Peter Myers, Dr. Peter Myers wrote it as we were getting ready to use uranium in Somalia in Africa in 93. And again, required a radiobioassay within 24 to 72 hours of exposure. Not days, weeks, months, or years later. Within 24 to 72 hours. And the reason for that is what we do know, and we wrote the medical directives, is that if you wait until after 30 days post-exposure, in other words, if you start, today, whatever today is, we waited 30 days to start the radiobioassay. The radiobioassay won't detect what your body actually got hit with, because what's mobile now in the urine is less than 1/1,000th of what actually was in the body. So in other words, they delay the testing, and therefore there's nothing there to be found, and therefore there was no exposure. This was a deliberate decision, deliberate act that was made many times, and then Dr. Bernard Roske and Dr. Michael Kilpatrick formalized it along with Colonel Bob Cherry, Colonel Eric Jackson, and Colonel Mark Melanson from the U.S. military. So we have all of these problems coming along. No two ways about it. Absolutely identified. There's probably been a dozen medical orders. And the other thing we need to know is when we require the medical care and medical orders for our own military by Geneva Convention under God, we have to provide the same medical care to everybody we expose, which is millions upon millions of people. So the orders are there to do it. Now, the most recent orders were written by General Peake, who was the previous Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and General Eric Shinseki, who is the current Director of the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. So the two past secretaries of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs and the last president are the officers that wrote the orders mandating medical care, immediate medical care for DU exposures. And it doesn't happen. And to me, that's unconscionable. And my continuous phone calls to them meet with silence.
Well, Doctor, we see this shallow, fake patriotism of salute the flag at a baseball game or football game, cry when you see the troops on TV, but then take their benefits, make them pay for their own health care, let them die of DU, shoot them up full of experimental vaccines. I mean, it's amazing that this is still ongoing and that they know what this is doing and they're engaged in a cover-up. And when the troops come in, I know you've seen this 100 or 1,000 times yourself. I'd like you to speak to it. When they come in wanting medical treatment, they're told, you're just mentally ill. Here, take some Prozac.
That's exactly correct. They give them the Prozac and the psychotropic drugs, and they ignore the medical problems, even though they know exactly what the medical problems are. And then what next thing we know is we've got the suicides, and we got the family destruction, and we've got all the crime rates and everything else. And I'm tired of dealing with it. Now, once you use uranium munitions, the Army Regulation 700-48, Section 2-4 is very, very specific what must be done. Now, this Army regulation I wrote, but General Eric Shinseki, who is now Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, signed off on it as a commanding general, making it mandatory. So what we do know must be done wherever uranium munitions are used. Quote, as soon as exceptional risk permits, the Corps, Joint Task Force Division Commander, Radiation Safety Officer will identify, segregate, isolate, secure, and label all radiologically contaminated equipment. Procedures to minimize the spread of radioactivity will be implemented as soon as possible. That's every place, okay? We have to bring explosives ordnance disposal units, the explosive experts in there. And during Desert Storm, EOD guys wouldn't go near it. I finally got 3 guys trained up for it, and they got killed at Camp Doha, and I still got their medals and, their certificate for medals in my briefcase. They were given posthumously, but didn't do a lot of good. The explosive ordnance disposal units will render all the equipment safe, because when this is used, we have incredible, not only radiological and chemical toxicities, but we have all the explosives hazards. So that has to be done. We continue on, and this comes down to everything else. The unit, this is all direct quote from the Army regulation that's posted on your website. People can read it, and everybody in the military needs to read this and understand it. Every mother, father, son, sister, daughter, brother, child of anybody in the military old enough to read needs to understand this. Quote, the unit team, individual responsible for equipment, whether friendly or foreign at that time or damaged, contamination responsible for taking all action consistent with this regulation and the Army pamphlet 700-48 that I also wrote. That's the down and dirty procedures. That's the cookbook of what you do. Quote, all equipment to include captured or combat radiologically contaminated equipment will be surveyed, packaged, retrograded, and decontaminated, and then released in accordance with the technical bulletin that you cited a moment ago, 1300-278, the pamphlet 700-48, and all the other relevant guidance that we put together. Safety precautions are incredible. I mean, they're very outlined. You do have a picture you can post on your website. I think Jared's already done that. Shows you the minimum equipment to use, work around this stuff, and everything else. When we start getting down to the environmental hazards, quote, radioactive material and waste will not be locally disposed of through burial, submersion, incineration, destruction of place, or abandonment, end quote. We've contaminated not only Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Balkans, Somalia, Afghanistan, but Vieques, Hawaii, Indiana, Florida, Nevada, California, Washington State. And the thing that bothers me the most, and I think, you know, you've done history and everything, and I think everybody remembers this. On the 18th of April, hardly a man is left alive that doesn't remember what Paul Revere's right?
Yes.
Concord, Massachusetts, where our nation was born, is one of the most highly depleted uranium-contaminated cities in the world because of the Starman plant. It is a national environmental disaster where the military is trying to clean it up. Albany, New York is also the same thing. Jonesboro, Tennessee is the same thing. I mean, these are totally contaminated areas because of uranium emissions with incredible medical problems. And we see the same thing in Hawaii, Schofield Barracks and out there in Hawaii, pristine environment where the U.S. military did nuclear weapons testing with Davy Crockett's and DU munitions, totally illegal, and left the contamination. And now, as we speak, right now, I got an email not even a few minutes ago before we came on. It's a mess, and they're refusing to take care of it.
All right, we're going to get more into this. I want to go to calls. You've got a lot more to cover, Dr. Doug Rokke, but we're going to talk to DU victims, former military and others, Danny, Dante, Noah, Jason, and others, specifically for military veterans who've been affected by this. You can actually hear what's happening to humanity, and then ask yourself, what type of government injects children with syphilis and smallpox and polio? What type of government sprays nerve gas on our troops in Project Shad and tells their wives they died of the flu? Psychopathic killers, practicing evil like a doctor practices medicine. What's government-run health care about? The death panels. Bill Gates now admits it. Newsweek cover. The case for killing Granny. Why is poison in all the major children's gums now? Aspartame, even in the sugar gum. You're being attacked, folks. They know what they're doing. Dr. Doug Rocke's got a lot more to cover, but let's start getting to your calls now. Danny in Arkansas, you're on the air. Hey, I can barely hear you. Can you speak right into the phone? Okay, while he figures out his phone system, we're going to put Danny on hold. We're going to come back to him. I can tell he doesn't have his hands-free plugged in or whatever. I can barely hear him. Dante in Jersey, you're on the air. Okay, what's going on is I'm not being sent the network audio. Okay, I am not receiving audio. So clearly, Dr. Rokke, can you hear them?
No, I can't.
Okay. We may have to get their numbers and transfer them to our phone system. Genesis is having an issue. Okay, well, I can do the show, but there's no audio from these people on my end. Okay, I'll guarantee you that. Dr. Rokke, while we continue to figure this out, continue where you left off about the contamination all over the country. And Danny, Dante, Noah, Jason, and others, we're going to get to you if we have to give you our phone number here at the office. Go ahead.
Okay, so what we've got is use uranium munitions in testing and manufacturing and everything else. Then we had to use uranium munitions in combat operations, which has left wholesale contamination throughout. Now, when we use uranium munitions against either armor or any vehicles, we shoot it up, it just totally destroys it, totally contaminates it. The Army regulations, again, 700-48 and the Army Common Task Training require that you wear full protective equipment when you go near it. That's a gas mask with the HEPA filter, which is not going to do a whole lot of good, and then protective clothing, special clothing, so you don't get it out of your clothes. So you got all that contamination, everything that's crossed over.